This is one of my favorite crowds in the world to talk to. And I think, I love in Australia how people acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and I would like to reiterate that. I would like to add my acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of plants in Australia, which I think is you lot. And I come here because I love you and because I learn so much from you every time I come here. So kudos to you for keeping this going for 10 years, and happy birthday. I'm here to help you celebrate. So obviously I got a couple of ideas of what you've been up to. I can't speak to you all, but this is what I've been up to. This is the Caldicott breeding program has started. I don't know what sort of ethnobotanical god has taken out 3 girls on me, but yeah, karma has come to crap in my ass. So that's what I've been doing. And I have to sort of credit the title of this talk to the little Jedi in the front there, Yoda, the Wodak. You can hang out with Wodak, and he comes out with these things, and it just makes you think. He's like some sort of zootropic agent himself. And we were at a conference in Canberra, and he was referring, I don't even know why he was using the term Terra Nullius, but it occurred to me, oh my God, that's something that we can talk about as far as drugs policy is concerned. And so that's kind of where I'm going to go. You know me, the last time we sat down and chatted together, it might have been in the Strathbogie Ranges, and I think it's the longest ever talk that's been given by anyone ever, which is probably why I've been put last here. So this could go on a bit, but I'll try to keep to time. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this term Terra Nullius, it's an obnoxious legal term, which kind of alludes to the fact that your glorious leader has spoken to on a number of occasions, which there wasn't much here before the Brits arrived. Now that's a load of cock, and you and I both know that. But it got me thinking that, in fact, as far as the drugs psychosphere is concerned, really, the international drug conventions are kind of the equivalent of the arrival of the British, because before the arrival of the international conventions, there wasn't anything much telling people what to do. Now, prohibitionists would say that there was a terra nullius, but in fact, there was lots going on. We actually were handling ourselves quite well, thank you very much. And this is essentially an occupation, if you like, of the environment in which people consume drugs. It's been occupied nearly for 100 years, formally since the 1960s. It's the 3 drugs treaties. And that hasn't done much for us, really. It's successfully banned a wide variety of substances, in your case, many plants, and of course, even more synthetics. I would love to update this slide in terms of what's been banned. I would imagine that it probably ranges closer to thousands than hundreds now. And trillions of dollars have been wasted in this endeavor. I just invite you to think a little bit about what a trillion means. I'm a simple man, and I need these sort of these pictures to remind me. This man here is stunned at his good luck on stumbling upon $1 million in his path here. These are bundled $100 notes, and that's what $1 million would look like in terms of bundled notes. So what's a trillion? You would say that it'd be a little bit more, maybe something like the size of the man. But it's not that. No, it's a million, it's 1,000 billion, it's got 12 zeros after it. And that's what it would look like. Those are double pallets, double stacked of dollars. And that's what $1 trillion looks like. I can't begin to tell you what health innovations I could do with just one of that set of $1 trillion, but we're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars being fought for a drug war that essentially has no end and probably has done far more harm than good. So this is a terrible scenario. And the problem is that the people who are waging this war are largely addicted to the products. So we're seeing increasing militarization of law enforcement. White-collar industry loves this because it generates a sort of a circle of income. And of course, profiteers from the producing criminal side of things enjoy it as well. So the people who really don't want to end the war on drugs are not very nice people at all. And in Australia, this is a kind of how we're spending money. It's a little bit dumb. The vast majority of this is being spent on law enforcement. These are the most recent figures that I can accurately rely upon. But of course, that doesn't account for the total expenditure, because what we really need to do is consider what we have to spend to mop up the nonsense afterwards as well. So add another 1.9 billion onto this mess afterwards. Where is this all leading? Will the apes take control of everything eventually? Are we looking at an apocalyptic demise of our species? I don't think so. I think I am more optimistic than this. I actually think that the drug conventions are under pressures that they can almost no longer bear. And I think those of us who are interested in a more generous time need to start thinking about what we're going to do after all of this has fallen down. Should we be thinking about revisiting a land before the conventions? You know me, I like telling stories. So I'm going to tell a story about, what I've been doing over the last 10 years. So my story in the Australian drug scene probably starts with pill testing at raves in South Australia. So it's about 10 years ago. And this is from the Enchanted series. And they were innocent days. If you had a positive test and a colorimetric spot test, you knew what you were dealing with. You don't know, there was only about 4 things that were around anyway. So it was actually these lovely times, lovely times to be a doctor, because most of the time you just had to treat people with Narcan or some benzos, and that was about it. The world has changed a lot, hasn't it? We published some of this data, and I guess that was the first inkling that we had that there were other things out there. There were interlopers. And we identified products that just weren't being turned up by law enforcement and that weren't being turned up by customs. The alpha-methyltryptamines, the DMMAs, the sort of phenomenon of our dance party colleagues using the rave as like a ute fest to show off their latest wares. And this was obviously a place where we had to be. If we wanted to find out what was new and coming onto the market, you had to occupy that space. I don't know if any of you went to Club Health in Sydney in 2005, where the good folk from New Zealand were handing these fine things out, all and sundry. Made for a very interesting after-party, I can tell you. I actually think this is the first legal high that was ever described in Australia. It's certainly the first I can come across. Once again, with the wit that I associate with your community, they were described as ease. Like a play on ecstasy. Very smartly packaged, black and white, goes with everything. And containing 4 pills, each of which contained greater than 99% pure methylone. And none of us had a bloody clue what that was. It took us ages to find a standard against which we could compare it. And this is back in 2005. I was like, oh, hello, that's very interesting. In 2007, a couple of us did an analysis with a certain amount of criticism, I must add, from the Blue Light website of these neodoves. And I actually think this is probably one of the first characterizations of mephedrone in Australia. And mephedrone is this fascinating progenitor of everything now. It's what I call the queen of the new Stone Age. And it's the model in which mephedrone has been marketed has now taken off. I bought this just out of interest when I was back in the UK, see how it would work. I was a little scared to take it, but I just wanted to see how quick it would come. So I went online, and I gave them my credit card details, and I was living in, the original Wales, not the new South Wales, but the original South Wales at the time. And it was shipped to me from London, and I got it in rural Wales within 6 hours of ordering it online. Yeah, that's delivery. And this clearly became a brand new paradigm for the sort of drugs that you and I grew up with. This is something very new, very unusual. If you're interested in this story, I have no vested interest in this at all, but Mike Power has written this extraordinary journalistic book called Drugs 2.0. He's turned into a very good friend of mine, and we chat a lot. He's a very interesting man. He's done a lot of research I commend to you this book. It reads beautifully well. He's interviewed everyone. He's lambasted the people who need lambasting. It's a great read. So I guess in retrospect, we could hardly be surprised about this. 100 years of a very cumbersome way of prohibition and the prohibition of these drugs is, I guess, similar to the idea of treating the same infection on your foot with the same antibiotic. And it was dumb. We should have expected that a new market would evolve. And so it's not just the drugs that we're talking about here. We're talking about an entire new market. So if you use the analogy, say, of influenza. Now, I get sort of exposed to flu every year. And I'm sorry if there's a bit of a medical theme going through this, but I'm kind of a doctor, so it's all I really know. But flu changes subtly every year. And I get a flu jab and try very hard not to poison my children when I take flu home. And then every now and again, some weird-ass zombie, pig-licking avian flu thing comes along and kills off a whole bunch of people. And we call the first thing a sort of an antigenic drift. Flu is making its way through the population, changing enough to survive for the next generation. And then there's this massive change, like the emergence of meth, like the emergence of MDMA. They're not always dangerous, they're not always bad, but there's this sort of tectonic movement in the market. And we've just had another one. So what are the effects of this? We've got brand new products, which we've never seen before. They're manufactured clearly to pharmaceutical purity. There are far more varieties than law enforcement can ever hope to ban. They're identified and sourced online by consumers. They're paid for using cryptocurrencies, untraceable payment. They're delivered by your postie on his Honda C100. They're unrecognizable by sniffer dogs. They are very difficult for us to identify and treat in the context of overdose, because not all of them cause overdose by any means. And you can't find them in people's wee-wee. So none of these things are, in fact, a move forward for drugs policy, I reckon. They make the dealing with these products, both as a consumer and somebody who needs to deal with the harm associated with them, a much more difficult proposition. Here's another example of what's going on. Another good piece. This is online. You can access it. The drug revolution that no one can stop. We're writing this up at the moment. So Mike was fascinated by this idea of these novel drugs. And so he said, screw it. Let's invent something. Let's commission something new. And I thought, well, shits and giggles, let's do that. So he identified a drug, which is an old drug. It's really responsible for the productivity of the Beatles in their Hamburg years. He methylated phenmetrazine. And he rang around. He spent a bit of money, I suppose, on long-distance phone calls, and came up with a sort of a cover story. He was trying to develop a drug for, I think it was a cough mixture for dogs, or something along that line. And so for only £600, he managed to get himself a gram of pharmacologically pure, absolutely pure, we tested it, of 6-methylphenmetrazine. And that's how long it took. So we now have an era of concierge drug design, where you can ring up. If you have the chemical knowledge and you know what you want, you can commission the creation of new drugs. And I'm not one for exaggeration, but I like to call this phenomenon the Vortex of Doom. I spend a lot of my time fighting with the tabloids, so I thought I'd get my own back. And I'll tell you how the Vortex of Doom works. So what you have is you've got new compounds developed that fall outside current legislation. The law catches up, and the process repeats. And it's very simple, really. But the problem is that it sucks a lot of people into it. Now, I have a lot of confidence in the way that you folk use drugs. Every time I talk to any of you, it's pretty sensible. Many of you are functional consumers. And I don't imagine that I have to treat many of you of a day in the emergency department. You stay safe. That is not the case for young people who are getting new into this scene. And so a lot of people are getting sucked into this sort of vortex, potentially at a time when something new, nasty, and dangerous is becoming available. We've seen some tragic consequences, potentially, of that this summer in Australia already. If you don't believe me at the rate of evolution of these products, I think you might have seen this already today, but this is from the CDDA. This is the rate of evolution of these novel products. And I think the thing that interests me is that while you've got all the tryptamines and the phenylethylamines, it's the other products. It's those things that actually don't belong to a big class themselves. It's all very well if groups of products are evolving like herds on the savannah, but it's the rogue ones that scare the shit out of me. And this is a dangerous place to be. You all will have heard of MPTP, or my own personal favorite, PMA. God bless his soul, he passed away this year, but Alexander Shulgin and I had a discussion about PMA, and he really wanted to know why Australians were so keen on it. And this was some time ago, when people were pursuing this environment. I'm actually concerned about the spontaneous evolution of something that is as dangerous as PMA, and something we should be concerned as, and perhaps your community should be concerned as elders within the consuming knowledge base. I'm going to say something controversial because I can. This is not a problem of the drugs themselves. This is a problem of how we've dealt with them. So what should we do? Well, look, I think there are two approaches, and they're complementary. One of them we should have in the background, we should sort of almost embrace it as a philosophy. And the other, we should just get on and fucking do it. So I've divided them into fluffy and pointy approaches to the problem. Fluffy, pointy. Fluffy. So this is an approach that I'm taking at the moment with our friends in spheres of political influence. And it involves a sea change in the way that we think about these things. I think approaches to drugs have to be based on science and harm and not morality. Now, there would be those of you who would say, well, that's bollocks, that's all medical. But this is the dialogue that is understandable within a community looking for change. We're going to talk a little bit about the discourse of pleasure. But I think the science has to take front and foremost precedence in this, rather than any sort of vague philosophical and morality-based discussion. I think the emphasis has to be on public health over criminality. And every decision that we make regarding products, novel products, old products, how we deal with them, has to consider the downstream implications of implementation. What do I mean by that? Okay, this is a political way of speaking. This looks really popular. Let's do that. Now, that I would describe as policy-based evidence. Okay, you are finding evidence to suit your policy agenda. But that's not public health. That's not science. That's not even really good policy in the theory of policy. The real approach that we should be looking at is, okay, we have an alternative that will probably lead to an outcome that we desire. And it's actually not important what the alternative looks like. It's the outcome that we desire which is important. And therefore, we should be embracing alternative A. Now, that involves legislating for individual products that are currently banned or illegal. If that involves changing the law so that fewer people get harmed by a given product, that's the right policy. So what we need to do, I suppose, is to create and state what our aims are. And that's, I think, half the problem in Australia, is that we have a very nebulous argument against drugs. And my argument to people who put out this sort of non-argument, non-debate about drugs, something that can't be put down, the classic is, this sends the wrong message. What I want them to do is to nail something down, make something concrete for me. Do you want people to use drugs less, or do you want fewer people hurt, for example? Because probably you can't have both. So make up your mind. If it's acceptable to you for young people to die because you want to send a message to others, just be explicit about that. It's kind of like the refugee situation. You know, just put out a statement and say, do you know what? We're kind of stopping the whole treaties that we signed up for as far as refugees are concerned. Just be honest about it and everybody will trust you. What about spiky and pointy things? My background's kind of testing, so I'm sorry if this is dull. But I think we really need to nail down analytical research, especially with the novel psychotropics. But I think there is going to be a lot of interest in the analytical side of cannabis soon. I'm very hopeful about medicinal cannabis, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. One of the interesting developments that we're looking at out of our research group in the UK is the idea of using a product as its own reference. The products which are being delivered to Australia are of such a purity that there's not a lot else in them except the product that's being ordered. Now, if you could characterize that, then you can use it as its own reference. One of the things that delays the analysis of these products internationally is the fact that shipping these things around the place is fraught with legal danger. Why not just use the product itself? There's plenty of stuff that we need to look at as far as looking at the stability of products on analysis. So some of these are really quite fragile, and actually doing the analysis itself breaks them up in such a way that we're not really sure what we are analyzing in the first place. And also, why not anticipate what's coming next and start making it and see if it hurts animals to start with? I don't have a problem hurting animals if it's stopping my kids getting hurt. We have very little information about the toxicological data associated with these novel products. And I think one of the key things that we could be doing here is setting up a spectrum of risk. Alex alluded to this earlier on, the hilarity that cocaine and cannabis occupy the same cross on the line of risk. What a load of crap. We need to look at all of our products and ensure that we are talking about the same risk for the same sort of product. And on that line, alcohol should be there as well. All of these products should be considered together, and anything that we consume for the purposes of entertainment should be rationally assigned a risk and therefore legislated against as far as a risk is concerned. For a product that contains no risk, hey, go hard. I don't care. There's a lot of work to be done on receptor analyses, and I think that there are a lot of products that are emerging on the market that we really should be looking at for therapeutic purposes. We have a problem with cannabis. God knows how we can get on with the novel psychotropic problems. This is another thing that I think we're terrible at in Australia. I don't know, hands up anyone here who's a sort of a mainstream drug researcher? Where are you? That's it. Well, 3. Good on you. 3 people. The largest gathering of wisdom in this thing, in this world in which we inhabit in Australia, and you got 3 researchers. Kudos to you. Brilliant for turning up. But, you know, there is disengagement between the consumer and the people trying to keep them safe. And I think that gap needs to be crossed. I really do. Having said that, I think that the consumer, you know, with great respect, I think you are kind of guilty of overstretching the safety of many of these products. You know, I treat them. Come walk a mile in my shoes and see what I'm seeing. And I think you probably wouldn't be as reassured about how safe many of them are. Some of them do nothing. And your problem is the ones which are most active, the ones which are most fun, are probably the most dangerous as well. I think we need to find common ground between researchers, between law enforcement, between legislators, and between consumers, and decide where can we work from? Because at the moment, it's us and them. It's, you know, you are having things legislated for you. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think many of you are involved in the legislative process last time I looked. I think one of the things that we have to do from my side of the fence is we kind of have to get into this discourse of pleasure, which is, it's a dog for us. We got to admit that, you know, this is fun. And it is, I know. But it's something that has to be accepted, even at a legal level. because you cannot have this discourse with consumers unless you start. I do lectures with secondary school kids, and I give a very different message to them than I would to you. If I was to lecture to sort of primary Catholic schoolgirls, I say, you're going to hell if you use drugs. Well, because that's probably what they should know about. To you, I'm going to say, look, lads, be safe, okay? I prefer a quiet night in the emergency department. And to people who are using intravenous drugs, I will go the further yard and provide them with needles and syringes to keep them safe. So we need to tailor our messages to the audience of consumers that we're dealing with. I think in 2015, we should be really thinking about tapping the knowledge that you folk have. With great respect to my scientific colleagues and my medical colleagues, I don't think anybody knows more about drugs than you do. I think that's particularly pertinent, say, for example, in the case of medicinal cannabis. I think it's really important that we return. There's this sort of debate that there's not a lot of research. Well, that's crap to start with. But in fact, there's ongoing ad hoc research in cannabis everywhere, always. And that may not be written down in the journals, but there's a verbal knowledge out there that needs to be tapped. And we need to accept that the quality of research may start with a verbal history to start with. I'm very interested in not merely asking people what they're taking, but in fact, give me that, you little bastard, I'll test it. It's not that I don't trust you when you tell me this is what you're taking. I honestly don't think you know. With great respect, it's a powder, I'll have some of that, it's lovely. I don't know what it is, but I'll have some. It made me feel wonderful last time it was white and it was powdery. So I don't think that's a good approach from your perspective. I think that could end up in trouble. Arsenic is white and powdery as well when it's ground up. So we need to sort of come to a way of working out what you're taking and maybe, influencing your decision whether or not you want to take it or not. And this is one of the things I do. So that's a lot of what I've been up to in the last sort of 5 or so years, is trying to work out systems whereby we can find out what you folks are trying to alter your reality with. We have no real handle on things like social harms, on injuries or deaths. You might think, oh yes, they've got a computer and it tells me exactly how many people are hurt or killed by methoxetamine. No, we've got a computer that tells us if you sprained your ankle, or you had palpitations, or any of the many things that could have happened while you were using methoxetamine. And I think we should be far more explicit than that. It's not that I want to prove that any of these products are more dangerous. In fact, I'm far more eager in proving how much more dangerous alcohol is in comparison to these products. I don't think any of these products, in the grand scheme of things, is going to even flick on my radar in comparison to the prescribed opiates, the prescribed benzos, or alcohol. But I can't prove that to anyone unless I'm collating that data. So we triangulate data, so a lot of the time from the stories that you tell us, from surveys that we take, from poisons information's data, publish some case reports, and usually they are only the most dramatic things. And we bring the emergency department data to this equation. And so a while back, we had a go at emergency department amnesty bins. This is my favorite picture ever because it gives me the opportunity to show PMA on Royal Adelaide Hospital headed paper. But hey, I think, what was it, the red Mitsubishis or something a long time ago? And we were able to identify these things well before my good friends in law enforcement were able to, because we went looking for them. DMMA and alpha-methyltryptamine. So we tried to set up a drug testing system in South Australia. And to say that it was politically not the right time is probably an understatement. But I arrived in Wales. That's the original Wales, not the sort of newfangled New South Wales. Back in 2010, right at the same time as the emergence of these novel psychotropic substances. And there was a lot going on. And we discovered that the Welsh Assembly Government Public Health Bunch said, yeah, well, we want to know too. Off you go. And so we immediately transplanted the methodology that we had developed for South Australia and were banned from using to Wales, and lo and behold, we had proof of concept. So we were able to identify products associated with harm, identify patterns of harmful use, and indeed develop brief interventions for consumers about how they might want to change how they're consuming drugs. And this is a group of people who are using drugs anyway, so we're not telling them not to use drugs, we're just telling them not to sort of roll 5 pills at the same time. And this is our little group. Go and Google it. It's changed a little bit. So it's come in for a bit of flack. It's become a system. It initially started as a system for monitoring presentations to hospitals associated with harm. And it's just taken off. It's worth £700 million at the moment. And it's now become a postal service. So if you've got a product that you want to find out what's in, you can post it in. We'll put it online, and the results will be up probably a fortnight, maybe a week, if you're lucky. And we'll analyze anything. So it's a long way to send stuff. So what I thought we ought to do was maybe replicate it in Australia. So this is the sort of thing that we do, some jolly green granules. That's not particularly useful to me. That sounds like some sort of frozen pea. And so the first phase of it is what we couple the patient's clinical details, so what they're presenting with. Did their head fall off? Did they have palpitations? And we couple that to a toxicological analysis, so using initially in the first phase a GCMS analysis, and then if we couldn't find out a profile from the current GCMS catalogs, we used NMR, and that's those. And nothing has actually defeated us to date. So we were one of the first people to identify methoxetamine in the UK using this tool, and able to map where people consume them. Now, there's no question that the patient's individual identity would ever be revealed here, but we are able to give community workers ideas where large rates of consumption are occurring, rates of consumption that result in harm. And that allows the more rational deployment of community workers to say, well, hang on a second, why are more people getting hurt in this postcode than elsewhere? And that we basically got a carte blanche from law enforcement to do this from a public health perspective. And so that's what the WEDINOS website looks like. You're given a unique identifier number with the form that you download to put the details on, and then you plug in your number, and you get the result of what your analysis is. We've had quite good success. So between October 2013 and June 2014, we had just over 1,300 samples sent to us with 213 new products identified. And including some products that hadn't been described before, at least in the UK. So this is useful. It's providing us information that is coupled to clinical information, which then we can feed back to the consumer groups and say, well, actually, do you know what? That's potentially harmful. And if we see a lot of what it is, then we can say, do you know what? That's really harmful. So, and we can also identify patterns in the way people are consuming and what they want to consume. I'll give this to some clever person, the presentation, so you can use it yourselves at some stage. This is my favorite to date, best bang for buck. It contains just about every illicit, plus a couple of pharmaceuticals that I've ever heard of. So that was clearly put together by somebody under the influence of cocaine, is my deduction. And this is my little group now. And I'm gleefully wandering around analyzing anything you're prepared to send to me. This is our latest, most interesting pill. You'll know what a feckin' idiot I am. I actually described this when I submitted it as a hula dancer, like a man going like this. That's what I thought it was. But of course, it's not, it's Bugs Bunny. So, didn't I feel an idiot? Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm still a moron. But our analysis revealed it to be a pill, mind you, sold as MDMA, but containing both 25I and 25C NBOME. That's an unexpected finding for me, and I think the community deserves to know about that. And so when we get something like this, the first place we put the results is on places like Blue Light, because that's who we work for. We will then tell the poisons units and the various people, other people, officials that need to know, we'll let them know as well. But it's the consumer community is where my mandate is to. And we found some other interesting stuff. I'll emphasize that none of these have any attractive hologram logos on. So these are not endorsed by the people that matter in this room. But we've acquired these, and this is quite a sort of a typical scenario. Don't let kids use them. I think that's a good idea. And also the idea that this is to be used for something else. You know, they don't dream of consuming this yourself. It's for fabric fragrance, something or other. And this contains both PB22 and the fluorinated version of it, which is a little bit more alarming, I think. All of these we had a little look at. Once again, all of them containing PB22 and the fluorinated version of them. Look, I don't have a problem necessarily with people using unusual products, but I do genuinely think people should know what they're using. And we see, interestingly here, a commercial tension between the producers of these products, who are very keen not to be shut down, not to be, because unfortunately the knee-jerk response is as soon as a new product is characterized, it's banned. Now, this is part of the problem. You know, we're not attaching these products to risk spectra. We're not doing a risk analysis of these products. We're just merely banning them once we know what they are. And that drives this forward. Double Your Poison contains just oral serotonin. The Silver Doves. And, you know, I love these convoluted botanical descriptions on the ingredients list, you know. How very fascinating that anybody would read that and believe it. It in fact contains merely caffeine. An interesting piperine, which is the sort of peppery taste of black pepper. Some people think that it's got psychohallucinogenic activity, but it's more anecdotal than anything else. It's just largely caffeine. Now that's a $35 espresso for you. There's a few other people doing this sort of thing. The Americans have got this Toxicology Investigators Consortium. We're rather excitingly teaming up with the folks in Stockholm, Strida. So we're going to be sharing data with them. And our intention is to make sure that all of this, if I can work out how to use the intraweb, then I'll be able to start posting these results on our website. But we were hacked with like a whole bunch of other people, and so it automatically closed down. We have to relaunch our website. So please come and find us on our website, and there'll be more information there for you soon. I think another area, and remember, my goal here is to try to put these novel products into context. I'm not trying to demonstrate that they're killing everybody always, because I don't think they are. I think there are products which are terribly dangerous. And I think when those sort of products come on the market, we need to be able to get on top of them in collaboration with each other to shut them down very quickly and stop them filtering out, say, for example, at a dance party where you could be faced with 10, 20 people seriously unwell. And so there will be products that are dangerous. There are many that are not. And so we've actually just set up a novel project now, so you'll appreciate that I do like my acronyms. DEADSET, which is the Deaths from Emergencies and Accidents data set. And we'll be trawling through that. That's the National Coronial Inquest System, which is, it's typical for you Australians. You set up something extraordinary and then you don't use it. And what you've done is you've collated over 300,000 coronial reports about everything. Anything that's had a coroner's report is recorded here. And that includes all poisonings and all deaths from alcohol. And I look forward to looking at deaths from alcohol as our first project. These are meth deaths from 2000 to current. And it looks like a little bit of spider shit. If you look at the numbers on the axis to your left there, we're only talking maybe 10 to 20 per state per annum. And then if you adjust for population, The only state in which deaths from meth are actually increasing is in WA. So I think there is a large group of people consuming meth, particularly in the rural environment, but they're not killing everybody everywhere. We've started a toxicology registry to start measuring the actual amounts of harm. And I think one of the other things that we need to do, and I'll say that to my 4 other colleagues in the room, is that within our sector, we need to play nice together. Now, I know I have a very luxurious environment. I actually, believe it or not, have a full-time job as a doctor. So I have a wage. I don't have to worry about grants or anything. I just do this for shits and giggles, largely. And, you know, it's sad to see colleagues fighting among themselves and trying to steal a march on getting the limited grant money that's available. And I think if we thought a little bit more about how to collaborate with people outside our own silos, we'd find the resources were there to do everything that we wanted to do together. I think coming to the end of all of this, we need to think about rational legislation. And that needs to be based on harm. The aim needs to be based on, directed towards reducing the number of people that are hurt through drug use. Now, not overdose, not acutely hurt, also the way people use drugs, the number of people who get infected by hepatitis and bloodborne disease, but it should be based on harm. And that probably means moving away from all of the drug treaties. So things that are dumb, you know, I only had, I didn't have 5 hours, so I limited myself to these dumb things. Closing all the bricks and mortar shops in Ireland, that was tremendous. That was a great boon to the internet business in Ireland, and in fact increased the number of novel psychotropics being sold in Ireland. Sequentially sacking all of your advisors until you find a group that agrees with you, which they did in the UK. Jail everybody who uses drugs, which is tremendous, because what happens there is that to survive in American jail these days, you need to be a member of a gang. And to join a member of a gang, you probably have to shiv somebody. So you go into jail, having killed somebody in jail, maybe having picked up a hepatitic disease from your intravenous use while in jail for merely possession of cannabis. It's a genius outcome. Of course, Australia is not one to be left out of these things, no. Banning all products on the basis of their packaging. Fabulous. How we laughed when we saw that. Or my favorite, I have to say, banning all plants that contain DMT. Yes. That's right. That's right. I don't need to tell you that that includes your national floral emblem. Yeah, so genius. So, you know, Australia is currently contributing to drugs policy what it is to climate control. So, you know, it's time to wrest control from the monkeys. So what is rational? What's useful? I have to say, I'm a little bit admiring of the Kiwis and their Psychoactive Substances Act. I think there are problems with it, and it got put through, like, it was hilarious to hear. Yep, everybody voted for it because they hadn't a fucking clue what it was about, but it's there now, yeah. And I think one of the interesting, I've been talking to some pharmacy folk, and one of the interesting things that may come out of this, I don't know if you're aware, but drug companies have these enormous back catalogs of products that they've tested for X, Y, and Z. And many of them are shelved for a wide variety of reasons. Some of those reasons are because they were psychoactive. And so many of these have already undergone phase 2 trials. They've had human trials, and the only reason that they were not deployed as an anti-smoking agent or as an antidepressant was because they were too psychoactive. So if a drug company were to look at the Kiwi market and say, I think I can calculate how much that market is worth, they're ready to go. And I think that's maybe where we see the next product. Some big balls, probably smaller drug company saying, have a go at this. I'm proudly European, sorry. And I'm very in favor of the concept of risk-based rules. So the idea, if any of you find something that doesn't hurt anybody, do you know what? Grand. Sell it if you can. Make $1 million. But you can have at it. But if the product that you're launching is, creating birth defects or whatever, it's going to be banned. If you continue to sell it, you should be thrown in jail. Where's the argument there? I don't think there's a problem with that. So this idea of risk stratifying, like every single other pharmaceutical product that is ever developed anywhere in the world, creating a risk stratification as to what the harms might be, the Europeans have embraced it this year. I've yet to see how it's implemented, but they've all signed off to it. So we're left with this idea that, you've got this unstoppable force of our drive, well, these days your drive, to consume interesting things, and the edifices that have been put up to stop you doing that. How on earth can we possibly get past all of this? You are, as a species, I would say, we are in a hole, in a very big hole. But here's the thing about holes. The first thing that you should do if you find yourself in a hole is to stop digging. And I actually think that there could be light at the end of this tunnel. And I'm sorry, I know this is going to irk some of you, but I think it may be through the stepping stones of the medical use of illicit drugs. And I know that many of you think that that's not acceptable. That's, a violation of my illicit rights, my conscious rights to do whatever I want to do. Hey, that philosophically may be the case, but what I'm talking about is a pragmatic approach to the way this may pan out. So here's what I think. I think very soon in Australia there will be medical cannabis. And I think, and that's compassionate, that's the right thing. And I think after a few years of that being the case, with the number of, soldiers and Navy folk that you're sending to Afghanistan and to sort of mop up the mess of tipped-over refugees, they're all going to have post-traumatic stress disorder eventually. Your entire Australian Defence Force will have post-traumatic stress disorder. And you will not have an efficient armed force in this country to save your life. They will demand treatment, and that treatment will come in the form of an MDMA trial. I think that's an inevitability. I think there is a groundswell of opinion, currently unspoken, but fueled also with a disillusionment in the inability of this current government to provide an adequate pay rise to the ADF. People are looking for a way to flip the bird at the government, and this may be the way forward. Why do I think this has got anything to do with recreational drug use? And I would emphasize and argue that I do not see the two issues as in any way connected from a legislative purpose, from the direct purposes of creating a way in which people can access additional products for medical reasons. I see this being a natural progression, because what will happen is that there will be an increasing number of people, because we're an aging population, using cannabis perhaps just for pain relief. And lo and behold, they're not all dying. They're not, Granny hasn't actually switched to meth this week. And so this will now become a topic of conversation around the dinner table. We're already seeing this. Talkback radio, some reprehensible people are advocating for medical use of drugs that are now currently illegal. And it is this popular movement that will actually drive legislative change. I think what will happen is you will see people choosing not to prosecute the law in the way that it's written for maybe even a decade. And then in the end, people saying, do you know what? It'd be like laws about sodomy. People say, Jesus, why is that still on the books? And people will say to themselves, let's just change the law. I said this morning, and I'll say it again, our species has been brainwashed about the evils of certain drugs. And no doubt they have caused harm. But it's been going on for 100 years. And it's going to take, hopefully, a fraction of that to reverse what essentially has been untruths. But it'll take a long time to reverse that, and it'll take a concerted effort. It'll take people being reasonable about it. And like Yoda has said earlier, probably a softly approach will gain you more traction than manning the barricades and carrying the banner. So where are we heading? So this is a lovely diagram. It's not mine, I wish it was. Looking at the sort of spectrum of approaches to drugs. And looking at the social and health harms. And the harms of drugs often come where you have an unregulated criminal market or an unregulated legal market. So if you think of, say, like alcohol and tobacco, this is the last frontier for the cowboys in the lobby industry in the world. The alcohol industry can do whatever the hell it likes in this country. But I think that's going to get shut down soon, I hope. And by the same token, I think we're going to see increasing leniency in the illicit markets. And what I suspect will happen, maybe a decade, Alex would argue more, but somewhere in the middle, we'll have a tightly regulated market for both, which is probably where we should be. So in summary, the drug treatises they're just groaning under the pressure of dealing with a market that they were never designed for. You know, this has overtaken the treaties in a way that could never have been anticipated. And that a nimble viral market, like the novel psychotropics, deserves an equally nimble, clever response to ensure that people don't get hurt. There's a ton of research to be done here, and that's exciting for me. And there are plenty of lessons that we can learn from overseas. We do not have to reinvent the wheel here. We just have to be plagiarists and pick and choose the best of what the rest of the world has to offer. Because at the moment, it's not from Australia. There are those who are going to say, this is the end of the world as we know it. And you know what? I applaud that. I'm delighted. It's about time that the end of the world as we knew it ended. Thanks very much for your time. Now, when I said I loved you, I meant it. So please, get in touch. I think you guys are wise, and I think you have a lot to offer. And if you want an outlet in a more formal environment, and I think many of you deserve it, come and find us, and we can chat. And I think the solution to a lot of the problems of harm in Australia will come from you guys. It's certainly not coming from the polys, nor the slightly nerdy folk that I mingle with, and including myself. It'll be you guys who save yourselves. So get in touch with me, and we'll chat.
Hello, David. Thank you very much for the talk. Always awesome. I've got a question. When you say that some of these new drugs are quite dangerous, I'm wondering what is your opinion of the N-BOM type hallucinogens that I know you've seen?
Mine has been largely negative, my experience. So I'm sure that within this room there are people who've worked out how to use them safely. So I know that, what's his name? Your man from the drug survey. Global Drug Survey.
Adam Winstock.
Yeah, Dr. Winstock has come up with a sort of a new approach, and that's largely go low and go slow. I suspect, you know, if we were clever, we could come up with a very good way of minimizing the potential harm from the N-BOMs. The problem with the N-BOMs, and young Stephen probably knows as much, if not more, about these than I do, is that they're very long-acting, they're very intense, and people generally, you know, if you take a lot of LSD, you're probably going to get into trouble because you're evading the giant bat attached to your head or something along these lines. But the N-BOM compounds actually are very serotonergic as well, so they can actually poison you too. So what young Winstock is saying is, remember 10 years ago we would say take half a pill and see what the effect was, and then take the other half like half an hour later or an hour later. They're saying take a quarter of the dose and then redose it 2 hours, which is pretty cautious. But you know, if you take into account that when I suspect an N-BOM overdose, I admit these people to hospital just on the basis that I suspect that they've overdosed on N-BOM, and they'll stay in hospital for 12 hours while I wait to see what happens. Because one of the other nasty bits about the N-BOM family is that you can look okay for several hours before the effects kick in hard. I don't know why that is. I have no rational explanation, but I've seen it 3 times now. And it's not as a consequence of mixed drug use, because I fucking test everything. I test their wee, I test their blood, I'm looking for everything. And it's just pure N-bone. So yeah, that will be one of the entities that makes me worried. It's not PMA, but it's damn close.
And I might just mention to the crowd too, with lots of contaminated batches of LSD, contaminated by N-bone this summer, Elrich's reagent will be our friend, because you can test your LSD, and if it's positive to Elrich's, it's not going to be N-bone. So you can buy it off
Look, I think there's been a lot of discussion about pill testing, and I think there will be a lot more. There's some very serious hitters now calling for it. And as you know, we were looking at this quite some time ago. I actually think the way forward for pill testing in Australia is to up sticks and bring a damn lab to a rave. That's kind of what I'm looking forward to do. We are looking at the colorimetric testing of the novel products at the moment. We have a project underway at the moment. It's not hugely promising, and it's an exercise in logic, really. If this is negative, then it might be that, and there's all these sort of Boolean terms in terms of working out what you've got. If I just got a near-infrared spectrometer to a rave, that would make life a lot easier. And one of the dividends of the glorious war on terror is that a lot of the chemical weapons detection kits didn't do their job as they were supposed to. They're out there in the market on eBay for no money at all. So we can buy those and take them along to raves. So that's, I think, what we'll be doing maybe in 2015.
No further questions. I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you, David.
Lovely to see you. Happy birthday.